This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is Chris Hadfield, the retired astronaut, fighter pilot, and author. Your career spanned 35 years as both a military pilot and astronaut, including 3 missions and almost 4,000 hours in space, culminating in you serving as commander of the International Space Station. During that time, you chronicled your experiences on social media, becoming a global star with your performance of David Bowie's Space Oddity, now seen over 50 million times on YouTube. In recognition of your service, you were awarded the prestigious Order of Canada, the NASA Exceptional Service Medal, and inducted into Canada's Aviation Hall of Fame. You've written a number of bestsellers, including your autobiography, An Astronaut's Guide to Life on Earth, which explores the philosophy you learned at NASA. Prepare for the worst and enjoy every moment. Your latest book, coming out later this year, The Defector, is an action thriller that follows the exploits of NASA fighter controller Kaz and draws on your many years of experience as a combat fighter pilot. Chris, welcome back to London Real.
Brian, it is a delight to see your face. You're looking very well, and I really enjoyed our conversation the previous times we've spoken. So I've been looking forward to talking to you today.
Yeah, me too. We had an incredible connection, and I just remember you being so present with me in that studio, and I felt it, and everyone felt it, and it's probably what you're like always. Really in the moment. We can talk about some of that IP that maybe you learned up in space, going forward. The thing I got to ask you about right away is I think you came and saw us in like January 16, and I think it was a week or two before David Bowie passed. And I remember the day that we found out, we made a special compilation video of part of your space and part of your interview at London Real Studios talking about the connection with the song, the way you modified it, the way it all happened. And I just watched that and it was really meaningful. So maybe we just talk about that first because it says a lot about who you are. Can you talk about that video and maybe for people that don't understand, explain how you filmed it in space, what it meant to you, and what's been the reaction even 7 years later to that thing?
Sure. I've been a musician my whole life. I bought my first guitar when I was 9 years old. I have a guitar right here in my office behind me. And up on the space station, there is a guitar, and it's put there because it's not just because I wanted to play guitar, but because a long time ago, our psychological support team, like most people on Earth know intuitively, they recognized that art is necessary for human mental health. I mean, you have to have that self-expression and the you can't just live on the dogmatic necessities of life. There has to be some beauty and some cleverness and originality and texture to what's happening. And so NASA psychiatrists bought this little guitar and they went to the guitar shop, if you can imagine. You can imagine a little troop of NASA engineers and psychiatrists going to a guitar shop. But they put it up there. It's a little Canadian guitar made by Larry Vay, a little slightly undersized. And when I knew there was a guitar up on the space station, I thought, oh, I've got to play and do some recording while I'm up there. I mean, what a rare opportunity to, if there's any spare time at all, to try and interpret what's happening. What is life like off of planet Earth? And can you turn that into some sort of artistic medium that then people can understand it a little more viscerally? And so it was my intent, in amongst all of the technical and leadership stuff going on. Um, and I got up there and I recorded a song that my brother and I had written because it was around Christmas time and we'd written sort of a space carol called Jewel in the Night. My son released that onto SoundCloud, and immediately people started on the internet going, whoa, there's an astronaut who's recording good music on the space station. He ought to do Space Oddity. And so my son, texts me a note. I'm working all day. I go into my little sleep pod at night. And there's a note from my son saying, hey, Dad, do a cover of Space Oddity. And I'm like, yeah, right. Why don't I just do a cover of Beethoven's Fifth as well? It's not, you can't just cover Bowie. He was brilliant. He was generational. He was just so clear thinking and artistically talented. But my son said something prophetic. He said, Dad, do it or you'll regret it forever. And I was like, well, shoot. Okay. So I got him to send me a copy of Bowie singing it. And all I did was a little karaoke version. I floated the microphone in front of me. I was listening to David in my headset. And then I just set up, GarageBand on my iPad and just plumbed it through. and I was just sort of humoring my son. But when I listened to just my audio track of singing Space Oddity, I was kind of surprised. I was very surprised. It it somehow felt right. It felt um, like it matched the circumstances. It matched the place that I was. And I don't know how Bowie knew that was going to work. You know, he was only 19 or 20 when he wrote that song. He wrote it just before we walked on the moon, but it just sounded so right. I thought, oh, cool. Okay, I'm going to put a little guitar into that. So the beauty of GarageBand, I could do multi-track. I put guitar underneath. And then I was going, wow, that sounds really lovely together. A friend of mine used to be in Bowie's band. She was a singer in his band, a lady named M. Greiner. I sent a note to M saying, hey, M, crazy project, but uh, I'm doing a version of Bowie's Oddity up here. What do you think? I sent her my audio track, and she's like, well, geez, you know, the astronaut dies in Space Oddity. You may not want. And so we changed the words, my son and I. But when she heard the vocals, she was like, wow, that's way better than I thought. And so she said, can I put a little piano intro? And then once she had that, she said, I got a friend who's a multi-instrumentalist, Joe Corcoran. He put all those great instrumentals underneath. And then I had my new lyrics. And so I did another vocal track on top because I loved their instrumentals. And suddenly we had what we thought was kind of a really lovely version of Oddity. Um, then my son, Evan, weighed in again and said, Dad, you need to make a video. You're in space. No one's going to believe you if you don't make a video of it. So I'm like, you know, hey, I'm kind of busy up here. I'm commanding a spaceship and we got 200 experiments. But he said, you know, just do it. And so one Saturday I stole an hour and I would play that track and sing along with myself and just film myself in a bunch of places I thought, you know, might be interesting. I floated a guitar down the Japanese laboratory module and just made a bunch of clips and fired all that video to my son and said, you know, if you can turn it into something great. And he and a buddy of his edited it. And then we had a big emergency on the space station. I forgot. We had to get Bowie's permission and had to
Ah,
contact through his legal team, but and through my friend M. But she came back and said, he loves it. And you know, he described it as the most poignant version of the song ever recorded. And you know, so he was tickled with the whole thing. And so my son edited into that video, and just with the timing, we didn't get it released until the day before I came home after 6 months. And it was so funny because I was super busy. We'd had a big emergency on the space station, had to do an emergency spacewalk. I just hadn't been paying any attention to what my son was doing. But I knew he'd released it. And I landed, we came flaming down through the atmosphere, rolled to a stop in the steppes of Kazakhstan, you know, and the team's there to rescue. They open up the hatch, and this guy leans in and he sees me. His name's Sasha, and he goes, Chris, привет, мальчик, как вы живете? Hey, Chris, я видел твой клип, очень прекрасно. Which is like, hey, Chris, hey, how you doing, guy? Hey, I saw that video you made. Man, it's outstanding. And I'm thinking, holy crap, we just got released it, you know, 12 hours ago. I am now in the middle of nowhere, Kazakhstan, and the guy has already seen that video and loved it, thinking, wow, you know, a lot of people must have seen it. And you mentioned it'd be seen 50 million times. That's just at my son's website. All the other places it's hosted, you know, it's hundreds and hundreds of millions of versions. And so it's a great project. But the coolest thing, Brian, was that Bowie was almost at the end of his life. As you say, he died shortly after you and I did that last chat together. And I was in this unique position to honor him. A song that he'd written back when he was 19, 20, you know, as a teenager. And he'd always wanted to fly in space, you know, all the Mars themes and Starman themes. Even his last album had space themes. And so he got to see his creation performed in a place that he always wanted to go in kind of a new and updated version. And I put a big smile on Bowie's face, you know, in the last a couple of years of that long and productive life, which to me was just the best part of the whole project.
that's so epic. And so I can't believe that you did all that while you were still in space over that period of time. And you're beaming it back on low bandwidth, but it's still getting there back to Earth.
what you do is, I mean, you work 16-hour days, but we sort of have a union, the astronauts union, where we've said we've got to get a certain amount of protected time, go to the bathroom, eat, but also for sleep. And what I decided was I don't want to come back from 6 months in space thinking, well, I didn't get much done, but boy, I'm well rested. I just didn't think that was the way to go. I thought every night that I have a little bit of extra energy, I'm going to steal some of my designated sleep time to do the cool and personal stuff, to write and to write music. I wrote and recorded an album. And so late at night, when everybody was supposed to be asleep, with the door closed on my little sleep pod, I would have that small guitar in there, and you couldn't even put it horizontal because there wasn't enough room. And I would write and record music. And so I just had to squeeze it all in. But when we did come back and rolled to a stop, I felt like it was everything I could have wrung out of myself and wrung out of the experience. I'd done the whole thing. I just don't know how I could have executed it any more completely than I did. To me, it's a little bit how I conduct life, but definitely when you're doing something that is rare and unique and something that you've worked towards a lot of your life, you try and fill every unforgiving minute with 60 seconds worth of distance run because then the rest of your life that can be one of those things you look back on. And yeah, and a lot of people would say, oh, well, what are you doing making music videos? You should have been working. We set records for the amount of science done per hour, per day, per week on the space station. No previous crew had been as productive as we were. And 4 days before we came home, when we had this major ammonia leak emergency, we still had the capacity to surge and work super long hours and to be able to do an emergency walk outside and save this whole space station. So yeah, to me, it was a balance, but I worked hard to balance it right. And to have, amongst all the other things, to have that version of Space Oddity is just a treasure for me personally, but for a lot of people, the way that they see space flight as a result.
It's so unique. And I think in the past we've sent these things into outer space, like, records and all these things that show human existence. But I think your video has got to be right up there in one of the things we would love for forms of life to see, because they would see that and be like, wow, those humans are really taking things to the next level.
Well, yeah, I mean it's all real, that's
Yeah.
just I've spoken obviously to so many people since my third space flight, but the perception that I have is that people see space flight a little more clearly because it's not just me telling them about it or showing a graph or just a snapshot, but this is our artistic expression in an entirely new environment where the world is turning silently next to you and you're weightless, which is just so much different than the normal earthbound experience. And it gives people much more of a visceral, intuitive feel for what it would be like for them to be living on a spaceship. And so that's kind of a lovely side effect of having put that video together.
Yeah, and I mean, I just watched it back a few minutes ago, and I mean, even the tone of your voice, I don't think you would have gotten that if you were at a recording studio in Los Angeles. Like, for some reason, you had to be
The
up there, right? You had to
Yeah,
be there.
weightlessness has an effect on you, psychological, of course, but also physiological. There's no gravity to push your diaphragm down at the bottom of your lungs, and there's no gravity to drain your sinuses.
Uh,
So your sinuses are always kind of clogged up. It's as if you always have a bit of a head cold, and it's hard to get a full breath because there's no natural gravity pushing the fluids down in your body. So it's a weird place to sing. Definitely a strange place to play guitar. You got to sort of reteach yourself how to play guitar. But I think it made it easier to hit the high notes just because of the physiological changes going on. And there's a lot of high notes in Oddity, especially in the chorus, so that was a little bit of a benefit.
it's interesting how we forget sometimes that there's more ways to communicate than um, a written piece or a piece of video, and that as humans, like, we really need lots of different forms of communication, from the physical to dance to art to music, to really convey the real feelings. And with you doing that, and I know you used to post a lot of those pictures on your Twitter account, I think back in the day, we talked about last time you were here, and just those brief pictures communicated, like you said, a completely different narrative than they would get with the normal ways that NASA typically communicate. Oh, we see the blast off, we see the landing, we see a couple, news interviews with you guys up there. But like you said, to convey all the subtleties of the feeling and maybe even the point of the journey takes other mediums somehow.
It's a human adventure. And it's
Yeah,
easy to lose sight of that.
right.
Rockets are just an amazing mechanical manifestation of human imagination. But and they're kind of thrilling. It's like going to a fireworks show. But we're not exploring for robots. We're not exploring for machines. We are exploring for ourselves to better understand the rest of the universe. How does the Earth fit in? How does the sun affect our world? How does the moon affect our world? What is the history of all this? How did Earth get to where it is? Why is Mars, which had a very similar beginning, why is Mars so radically different than the Earth now? What is the future of our planet? All of that is human centric. It's for us to better understand what's going on, and then all of the human stories that go into the effort of exploration itself. To me, that's the really interesting part. It's the humanity of it that is endlessly fascinating and the most complicated part. And so, trying to share not just the fact of how we fly in space, but sort of the ethos of it and the impact of it and the how it affects different people in different ways. That is the true story. And as we're now not just living internationally on the station for the last 22 years, but right on the cusp now of start walking on the moon again, but with the intent of having ever longer and longer human presence starting to settle on the surface of the moon. That's where we are in history. And what does this mean for the grand human adventure? And how can we make it sustainable in the long term? And how can we make it beneficial to ourselves and everything else on Earth? That's the great adventure going on. And I work hard all the time, whether I'm in space or back here on the surface, to try and share the ideas of that.
And that's what I wanted to ask you, Chris. I mean, how has the space narrative or our relationship with space and beyond changed since you were up there? I mean, it's been what, 20, 25 years, and a lot of things have changed. We've got the Webb telescope up there, which is completely next level. You've got us, I think, landing on the moon in the next couple of years. You've got Musk constantly talking about Mars, to where it's in the zeitgeist, it's in people's minds. How has the the relationship we have with space changed since you were up there?
Imagine what it was like in Europe 600 years ago when you stood on the shores of the Atlantic. I mean, for gosh, I don't know, 30,000 years, people have been living in Europe. And when you look to the west, when you walk down to the water's edge, you look and there's the ocean and there's the sky, and it's just huge room to imagine, but with very little information. And the reason we didn't have anything beyond imagination was we hadn't invented good enough boats yet. We didn't know how to sail and navigate beyond sight of land. But as soon as we started inventing the technology that would allow us to go explore, it opened up huge learning opportunities, understanding, the world is round, and the differences of all of the different continents and how this all works together, and how we fit in. It's suddenly, by a human invention of transport, it opened up almost limitless possibilities. And that was just with boats. And then, of course, faster boats, steamships, and then airplanes. And now, I mean, later today, I'm going to just jump on an airplane and go to San Francisco, right across North America. And all I'm really thinking about is, will the Wi-Fi work, and will the food be okay? And I could go to Australia the same way. And that integration of technology at almost an invisible way into our freedom to pursue things and to learn things and to imagine and answer that imagination. That's what's going on in space. It used to be impossible. Just up until, 1961, we were just standing on the shores of the Atlantic wondering. But with Gagarin and then Al Shepard and then everything since, a very few of us, like the very earliest explorers, whoever you want to choose, started to get a glimpse of what lies beyond our atmosphere. But what's really changed recently is we've gone from like early sailing ships to steamships, maybe even to airplanes, where the new rocket ships are reusable and way, way safer than the previous ships. And so they're simpler and they're safer, and therefore they're much, much cheaper. And so it's opening access to not just a very rare few, extremely trained astronauts, but to more and more people are going to be able to take that voyage across the unknown. And that's where we are in history. But what are we going to do with it? How are we going to regulate it? How are we going to integrate it into what is considered normal? Let's take the moon as an example. You mentioned within the next few years, we'll have people on the moon. The Chinese said just last week, by 2029, we will have a Chinese lander on the moon and Chinese folks walking around on the moon. So what are we going to do? This isn't just a technical question. This is very much a human socio-political question. Whose laws apply on the moon? And are we just going to take the current snapshot of ridiculous geopolitics on Earth and just superimpose that on the surface of the moon? I'll have a little America, a little Russia, a little China. That would be maybe understandable, but it sure would be regrettable. And we have a good example. We settled Antarctica differently than we settled any other continent on Earth. We did it much more deliberately, and we did it much more cooperatively. And the geopolitical set of laws and cultures that we have in Antarctica is different than anywhere else on Earth. So we have the capacity to learn from what we've done in the past and to do new things differently. The moon, if you laid it out on a map, is bigger than Africa, and it hasn't been hardly surveyed at all. Literally, we've just scratched the surface in a few spots. So where we are in history now, how it is that we're going to settle the moon,